The sun hung heavy over the desert, a burning orange eye that watched over a land where nothing ever seemed to move except the wind and the occasional tumbleweed. The town of Dustgrave had long ago earned its reputation as a place where time stood still, and folks had long given up on leaving. There was no reason to, really. The soil was parched, the wells had run dry, and the only thing that thrived was the dust, endless, choking dust that rolled across the town like some kind of living thing. Out on the outskirts, where the wooden saloon signs groaned in the wind and the whiskey was just a little too bitter, there rode a man who could have been a ghost. His name was Clint Mercer, though folks just called him the Ghost Rider, a moniker he had earned not from his skill with pistols or his silver tongue, but from his uncanny ability to disappear. Clint never stayed in one place for long. The land was too vast for someone like him to be shackled by anything, least of all the folks of Dustgrave. Clint's hat was a weathered black thing that had seen too many storms, and his boots had walked across more graves than he cared to remember. He wasn't the type of man to ask questions or give answers, preferring instead to let his actions speak for him. When the local sheriff needed help with a rowdy band of outlaws, Clint was the man who would disappear into the dust, only to return with the job done. He was the man everyone feared, but not out of hate. No, it was a deep-seated, almost primal respect that Clint had earned. He was death's messenger. It was in one such desert storm that Clint first saw her, though it wasn't at all what he expected. The storm had come out of nowhere, a swirling vortex of sand and sky that blurred the line between reality and madness. Clint's horse had grown restless, the air thick with a smell that made his throat burn. He had been making his way back to Dustgrave, having spent a few weeks tracking down a gang of thieves up north. His mind was muddled with the weight of the journey, and as the storm's fury grew, Clint found himself squinting through the chaos, searching for shelter. That's when he saw her. She was standing alone in the middle of the desert, dressed in a long flowing gown that shimmered under the erratic light of the storm. Her skin was pale, so pale it almost seemed to glow, and her hair, if it could be called hair, was a mass of silken strands that looked as though they belonged to the stars themselves. Her eyes, wide and otherworldly, reflected no fear. She was just there as if waiting for him. Clint's hand instinctively went to his side, where his revolver hung, but something told him this wasn't a situation he could shoot his way out of. "Who are you?" Clint shouted over the wind, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him, or if she even needed to. "I am Lyrixa," she said, her voice cutting through the storm like a bell. "I've been looking for you, Clint Mercer." Clint's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea who, or what, this woman was. But something in the way she spoke, something in her eyes, made his gut twist. The storm seemed to pause around her, the sand falling gently to the ground in a surreal dreamlike motion. Time itself seemed to bend. "I don't know you, miss," Clint muttered, though his hand never left the grip of his gun. "What do you want with me?" Lyrixa's smile was strange, more like an expression of pity than anything else. She stepped closer, her feet not even leaving prints in the sand. "You're here to help me, Clint. You are the only one who can." Clint raised an eyebrow. "Help you? In this hellhole?" She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "The world is ending, Clint Mercer. The place you call Earth is not what you think it is. It is a stage, and we are actors in a play whose ending has already been written." Clint frowned. His mind had always been a simple one, trained on the basics of survival and violence. He didn't trust fancy words or women who appeared out of nowhere in the middle of a desert storm. And yet, something about Lyrixa's presence was unsettlingly magnetic. "You're not from around here, are you?" Clint asked, squinting at her. "I am not," Lyrixa replied with an eerie calmness. "I come from beyond your stars, from a place where time and space bend like the wind you know so well. But there are things on Earth, things you cannot comprehend, that threaten your very existence." Clint's hand tightened on his revolver. "I've seen things that would turn your hair white, lady. So spare me the talk. If you've got business with me, say it fast." Lyrixa's expression turned serious. "There is an entity. It sleeps beneath this desert, and soon it will wake. When it does, everything you know will cease to exist. I need you to stop it before it's too late." Clint stared at her, incredulous. "And how the hell am I supposed to stop something like that?" Lyrixa's smile returned, but this time it was colder, more knowing. "You've done things like this before, Clint Mercer. You've killed men, demons, and monsters alike. You've stared death in the face and come out on top. But this is something different. This thing beneath the earth is older than your world, and it doesn't play by the same rules. Clint snorted, trying to shake off the chill that was creeping into his bones. Monsters, who? Lady, if you're trying to sell me some tale about ancient gods or alien creatures, I'm not buying. Lyrixa's eyes flashed with an intensity that made Clint's stomach twist. I'm not asking you to buy anything, Clint. I'm telling you that your world is about to burn, and only you can stop it. Before Clint could respond, the storm seemed to grow louder, more violent. The wind howled like a beast, and the ground beneath Clint's feet began to tremble. It was then that he heard it, the low rumbling growl that came from deep beneath the earth. Clint spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun, but he didn't know what to shoot at. The growl grew louder, more distinct, until it felt as though the very ground beneath him was alive, breathing. Get on your horse, Lyrixa commanded, her voice firm and urgent. Clint didn't need any more persuasion. He kicked his horse into motion, glancing back just in time to see the ground split open in front of him, a black chasm that seemed to stretch into infinity. Out of that chasm came something that could never have been imagined by the human mind. It was dark, formless, a writhing mass of shifting shapes and eyes. Eyes that blinked and stared at Clint with a hunger that went beyond reason. For the first time in his life, Clint Mercer, Ghost Rider, Deathbringer, man of dust and sun, felt real fear. Clint's horse reared up in terror, its hooves kicking up a cloud of dust and sand as the ground cracked open wider. A thick black smoke started to spill from the chasm, and with it came the stench of rot, a fetid odor that clawed at Clint's throat. He forced his horse forward, spurring it into motion, but the beast fought against him, its instincts screaming to flee from whatever hellish thing was rising beneath them. Lyrixa didn't hesitate. She was already galloping ahead, her gown trailing behind her in the wind like some kind of strange banner. She moved like a shadow, too fast for Clint to even fully comprehend. And as she rode, her voice sliced through the chaos. The entity beneath is called Nzar, the Eater of Ages. It has waited here, slumbering, for a time longer than the earth itself. Now it is awake, and with its awakening, the rules of this world will change. But you can stop it, Clint. You have to. Clint gritted his teeth. I don't know what kind of nightmare you're dragging me into, lady, but I ain't the hero you think I am. Lyrixa turned her head, her eyes flashing with an otherworldly light. You are more than you know. But there's no time for doubts now. The Eater of Ages must be stopped before it devours your world. Clint looked over his shoulder, his hand still tight on the reins, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The creature was emerging fully now, a massive thing with too many eyes, an ever-shifting mass of darkness and void. Each of its eyes opened wide, and with each blink, Clint felt the air grow colder. He could hear them now, the whispers. They weren't in his head, though they felt like they were coming from the depths of his soul, tugging at him, calling him. Come to us. We know you. You cannot escape. The ground trembled again, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the planet itself, and Clint had to fight the urge to turn and flee. He wasn't the type to run, but this was different. This was beyond anything he'd faced before. But Lyrixa's voice cut through his fear. We need to go deeper, Clint. The creature's heart lies beneath the old mine shaft just outside town. That's where its power is focused. If we can destroy the heart, we can stop it. Clint's instinct screamed at him to ignore her and get out, but something else, a strange compulsion he couldn't explain, pushed him to obey. He nodded curtly, steering his horse in the direction Lyrixa had pointed, towards the old mine. As they rode, the wind howled around them, the storm growing more violent, the ground beneath their horses' hooves shaking as if it were alive. The mine was an ancient structure, barely standing after decades of disuse. The wooden supports creaked under the weight of time, and the air around it felt oppressive, as if it were pushing back against anyone who dared enter. A few old shacks surrounded the entrance, their windows broken, their doors hanging off their hinges. Dust had settled in layers thick enough to hide any secrets beneath. Clint pulled his horse to a halt just outside the entrance. The smell inside the mine was different from the desert air, a sharp metallic scent mixed with something rotting, something ancient. Lyrixa dismounted quickly, moving with an eerie grace as she led the way into the darkness. Clint hesitated. You really think we can take this thing down with a couple of sticks of dynamite and a prayer? She didn't answer him immediately, her gaze far off, like she was listening to something Clint couldn't hear. The air around them seemed to hum with a low vibration, and the temperature had dropped by several degrees. It was as if the mine itself were alive, breathing with anticipation. "I think," Lyrixa said quietly, "that you don't have much of a choice." Clint frowned, drawing his pistol and following her into the mine. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though they were wading through some kind of invisible muck. Clint's boots felt heavier with each step, and the silence grew oppressive, pressing in on him from all sides. At last, they reached a vast cavern at the heart of the mine. It was cavernous and dark, filled with the remnants of abandoned mining equipment, rusted carts, twisted metal, and broken tools scattered like forgotten remnants of some ancient civilization. But the real horror lay in the center of the cavern. In the middle of the room stood a massive stone altar, blood-stained and worn from centuries of neglect. Around it were symbols, strange alien markings carved into the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. And upon the altar, suspended in mid-air as if held by some unseen force, was the heart of Nzar, the creature Clint had only begun to understand. It was a pulsating dark mass, about the size of a horse, with tendrils that squirmed like worms beneath its surface. Each pulse sent ripples of shadow across the cavern, and Clint could feel the ground beneath him shaking in response, as if the heart itself were calling to something. Or perhaps calling for something. Clint's hand twitched toward his revolver, but he knew deep down that shooting at it would be useless. No bullet in his belt would stop something like this. "What is this?" Clint whispered, more to himself than to Lyrixa. "This is where it begins," Lyrixa said softly, her voice distant. "The heart of the Eater of Ages. If we destroy it, the creature will die. But if we fail, it will wake fully, and the world will cease to exist." Clint looked at the heart, then back at Lyrixa. There was no turning back now. He didn't have the faintest idea how to destroy something like that, but if he didn't try, the world would end. He knew that. So he reached for his last remaining dynamite stick, his fingers trembling. "Here goes nothin'," Clint muttered under his breath, setting the fuse. But just as he prepared to throw the dynamite, the heart shuddered. And then it began to scream. The sound was more than a mere noise. It was an assault on his mind, a scream that resonated with every bone in his body. The ground cracked wider beneath their feet, and the walls of the cavern began to groan and shift as if the very earth were coming apart. Lyrixa stepped back, her face filled with an expression Clint couldn't place. Pity? Horror? Perhaps both. "I hope you're ready," she whispered, just as the heart's dark mass began to open like a grotesque flower, revealing eyes, hundreds of them all staring at him. Each one blinked in unison, and Clint felt his very soul begin to unravel. The real battle was about to begin. The eyes blinked in unison, and Clint could feel his pulse racing, thumping in his throat like a drumbeat that matched the frantic thrum of the heart. Each eye was an abyss, a swirling vortex of blackness, pulling at his mind, dragging him deeper into a space that didn't seem to belong to reality. He could feel his thoughts disintegrating under their gaze, becoming nothing more than fragments lost in a sea of nothingness. He fought to remain grounded, his feet planting firmly on the dusty earth, his hand tight on the dynamite stick. But the scream, the creature's scream, didn't stop. It continued to reverberate through the very core of his being, and Clint had to fight the urge to drop the dynamite and clutch his head in his hands, to run screaming into the darkness. The ground cracked again. The cavern trembled with such force that Clint's legs nearly gave way beneath him. It was like the earth itself was buckling under the weight of this ancient horror, and with every tremor, the eyes seemed to grow larger, the dark mass of the heart writhing as though it had a life of its own. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something worse, something foul, something alien. And then the eyes, those terrible infinite eyes, focused entirely on him. Clint's breath caught in his throat as they began to speak, though their voices weren't heard with the ears. No, they invaded his mind, curling around his thoughts like tendrils, whispering in a language that made no sense, yet somehow Clint understood it. "We are the void. We are the hunger. You are but dust in the wind, a fleeting thing. There is no escape." The words weren't words at all, but feelings. The weight of inevitability. The promise of annihilation. The certainty that no matter what Clint did, the end was already written in the stars. You don't have to do this, Clint Mercer," Lyrixa said quietly, her voice sounding almost lost. "There's still time to." Clint whirled around, his eyes wild with panic. "Time? There's no time, lady. You're tellin' me this thing's been sleepin' under our feet for centuries, and now we've got to stop it in a blink of an eye." But his anger quickly faded into a cold realization. Lyrixa's expression wasn't one of reassurance, but of regret. She stepped closer, her hand extending toward him as though reaching for something she couldn't grasp. You must understand, Clint, this creature, this thing, was never meant to be stopped by ordinary means. It's beyond your weapons, beyond anything you know. The only way to defeat it is to sacrifice what you hold most dear. Clint stared at her, a sick feeling creeping into his gut. He took a step back, shaking his head. Sacrifice? What in the hell are you talking about? You are tied to this place, Clint, she said softly, more than you realize. Your soul is woven into the fabric of this world. If you want to stop Nzar, you must sever that tie. Clint's face paled. Sever the tie? How the hell do you? But before Lyrixa could respond, the ground split again, wider this time, and from the depths of the chasm rose the full horrific form of Nzar. It wasn't just a mass of eyes and shadow anymore. It had legs, twisted and elongated, each one impossibly long, like giant spider limbs coated in black, pulsing veins. Its body was a vast writhing form of tendrils and wriggling mass, and where its heart had once been, there was now an endless gaping maw, a mouth that opened wide enough to swallow the entire cavern, to consume everything in its path. Clint staggered back, the dynamite slipping from his grasp as he watched the creature rise, its terrible form filling the cavern, casting shadows that stretched to the edges of the walls. He could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on him, suffocating him, and the voices in his head grew louder, more frantic. You are nothing. You are nothing. You will be devoured. Clint tried to move, to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. His heart raced, and his breath came in ragged gasps as the creature's gaze locked onto him. The air around him grew thicker, heavier, as if the creature itself were inhaling him into its depths. Lyrixa stepped forward, but Clint barely noticed. His mind was consumed with the terrifying reality before him. The creature's maw was open now, a chasm of darkness, and he felt a strange compulsion to walk toward it. The pull was magnetic, like a force that reached out to drag him into the very heart of the universe. Then Lyrixa spoke again, her voice a whisper beneath the roar of the beast. Clint, you have to make the choice. You must destroy it. The way is through the heart. Through your heart. Clint's world spun. The voice of Nzar was in his mind again, swirling, insistent. You are nothing. You are mine. His knees buckled as the weight of the creature's presence seemed to crush him. He felt his fingers go numb, the darkness closing in on him. The only thing that remained was the terrible pull of Nzar, dragging him toward that yawning abyss. Clint, Lyrixa said again, her voice firm but distant. You can stop this. The air shifted. In that moment, something snapped within Clint. He wasn't sure what it was, fear, courage, anger, or maybe just sheer desperation, but suddenly it didn't matter. He reached into the folds of his duster, pulling out the only weapon he knew could do something, anything. He had no idea how it worked, no idea if it would even be effective, but he did it anyway. It was a small device, no bigger than a pocket watch. He didn't have time to think about it. Without hesitation, he slammed it into the ground with every ounce of strength he could muster. There was a moment of pure, suffocating silence. And then a crack. It wasn't just a sound, it was a shift in reality. The cavern trembled, the walls buckling, the ground shaking violently as if the very fabric of existence had been torn open. Clint stumbled backward, but he wasn't sure if it was the ground shaking or his body shaking from the sheer force of whatever had just happened. The creature screamed, a high-pitched, ear-splitting wail that filled the air, making Clint's bones ache. Its form wavered, flickering like a mirage. The eyes that once stared down at him with predatory hunger began to blink erratically, and the shadows that made up its body began to distort, twisting in unnatural ways. Nzar was not dead, but it was weakening. Clint couldn't take his eyes off it. He had no idea what he had done, what that device had done, but he knew one thing for sure: they had a chance now. The Eater of Ages was still powerful, still alive, but it was faltering. Clint looked at Lyrixa, his heart pounding, his thoughts still scrambled. What the hell was that? He demanded. She didn't answer him right away, but when she did, her voice was filled with a strange reverence. That, Clint Mercer, is a part of the key. The other half lies within you. Clint didn't have time to ask what she meant. The creature was coming for them. The cavern shook once again, this time with such force that Clint was thrown off his feet. The black mass of Nzar seemed to pulse violently, its twisted form flickering between reality and something far darker, like a nightmare that had never truly left. The air grew dense, heavy with the stench of decay, and Clint's vision blurred as the beast's screeching grew louder. He could feel it in his bones. Nzar was angry now, and when it was angry there would be no mercy. Clint pushed himself back to his feet, grabbing the nearest support beam and using it to steady himself. He glanced at Lyrixa, who stood motionless, her eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. "You're not going to just stand there, are you?" Clint growled, his voice hoarse from the tremors in the air. "I didn't sign up for any of this." But Lyrixa didn't respond. She was staring at the creature, her expression unreadable, as if calculating something Clint couldn't begin to understand. The ground beneath them groaned, cracking wider, and Clint could feel the weight of Nzar's gaze upon him. "You have to go deeper, Clint," she finally said, her voice strangely calm. "The heart, it's not just a physical thing. You have to sever the link within yourself." Clint narrowed his eyes, gripping his revolver tighter. "What are you talking about, lady? What link?" Lyrixa took a step closer to him, her face filled with a strange, melancholic intensity. "You have always known it, Clint. The thing that ties you to this world. The reason you can face death without fear. The reason you never stay in one place. It's the reason you're the one who can stop Nzar. But it comes at a cost." Clint felt a cold sweat prickling his neck. "I don't follow. And I sure as hell don't like where this is going." Lyrixa's eyes softened, but her voice remained unwavering. "You are a part of this world, Clint. You always have been. But you were never meant to stay. Your soul is bound to this place, tied to the very land where Nzar lies sleeping. To stop this creature, you must sever that tie. You have to let go." Clint stumbled backward, his mind racing. He had always felt the pull of the road, the yearning to never stay in one place too long. It had been a part of him for as long as he could remember, like a curse or a blessing, depending on the day. But to sever that, to give up that part of himself, it felt impossible. "You're telling me I've got to give up everything?" Clint's voice cracked with disbelief. "The very thing that's kept me alive all these years?" Lyrixa nodded, her expression a mix of empathy and determination. "You've been running, Clint. Running from your past, from the pain of loss, from the emptiness of being tied to this world. But Nzar feeds on that emptiness. It is what makes you susceptible to its power. To destroy it, you must choose to let go. Let go of your need to be alone. Let go of the curse that binds you." Clint shook his head, his chest tightening with fear and frustration. "No. No, I can't. This is who I am. I'm Clint Mercer. I've spent my whole life surviving, and now you want me to just stop." The ground trembled again, this time with a violent force that knocked Clint off his feet. He hit the ground hard, but before he could regain his bearings, the shadows around him twisted and turned, creeping toward him like 1,000 hungry hands. Nzar was coming, and it was coming fast. Clint's heart raced, panic surging through him. But then, something unexpected happened. Lyrixa's hand reached out to him, her grip firm and steady, pulling him to his feet. Her eyes locked onto his, and in them, Clint saw something he had never seen before: compassion. It was strange, almost alien, but it was there. "This is the only way, Clint. The creature feeds on fear, on isolation. You can't defeat it by running from it. You have to face it. You have to face yourself." Clint's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he wanted to reject it all. He wanted to turn and ride off, to leave this nightmare behind and never look back. But then the eyes of Nzar locked onto him again, those terrible infinite eyes, and Clint knew deep down that there was no escaping this. Not anymore. He looked at Lyrixa, his chest heaving. "What do I have to do?" Lyrixa's face softened, and for the first time, Clint saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You have to go to the heart. But it won't be a physical journey, Clint. The heart is within you. You've carried it your whole life, hidden beneath layers of pain, guilt, and fear. You must confront it. Confront yourself. Only then can you sever the link." Clint stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a stone in his chest. His mind raced with memories of the people he had lost, the lives he had ruined, the choices he had made. All the pain and regret he had buried deep within him, in places even he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. And suddenly, he understood. He understood what Lyrixa was asking him to do. It wasn't just about defeating the creature, it was about facing everything he had tried so desperately to forget. The shadows grew thicker, the creature's presence overwhelming. The cavern was alive with the sound of its hunger, its endless, insatiable need. Clint took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He could hear the whispers again, the voices from the abyss, but this time they didn't terrify him. They called to him, urging him to step forward, to face the darkness. "I'm ready," Clint whispered. With a final glance at Lyrixa, who nodded in silent approval, Clint stepped forward, into the heart of the cavern, where the darkness seemed to swallow him whole. Clint's footsteps were heavy as he walked toward the heart of Nzar, each step sinking deeper into the void, like walking through the very fabric of reality itself. The darkness around him thickened, coiling like smoke, but it was different now. He was no longer afraid. The oppressive weight that had once hung over him, suffocating his every breath, had begun to fade. He had accepted it. Lyrixa's words echoed in his mind, "The heart is within you." He was no longer just fighting Nzar. He was fighting himself, every mistake, every regret, every wrong decision that had brought him to this place. The road had been his only companion, and it had led him to this moment. The fear of loss, the need to run, to never stay in one place, had always been his shield. But shields made of fear never lasted. The cavern stretched endlessly before him, the walls shimmering with strange light, the symbols etched into the stone glowing faintly. Clint reached out, his hand brushing against the cool surface of the wall, and something shifted. The symbols flickered, like they were alive, reacting to his touch. He didn't need to understand them. He didn't need to understand anything anymore. He had come to the place where answers didn't matter. And then he saw it, the heart of Nzar. It wasn't a thing of flesh and bone, as he had expected. It wasn't a pulsing, grotesque mass. No. The heart was a mirror, black and endless, reflecting every part of him, every fear, every broken dream. In the mirror, Clint saw himself, the real Clint Mercer, not the hardened gunman, not the man who had spent his life running, but the boy who had once had dreams, who had once believed in something more than the endless dust. The reflection in the mirror smiled at him, but it was a smile he hadn't seen in years, a smile full of hope, full of promise. And then the mirror cracked. The shards fell away, revealing the truth that had always been there, the truth that Clint had buried so deep, it had nearly consumed him. He wasn't running from Nzar. He was running from himself. A deep voice, not of Nzar, but of his own soul, echoed in the vast emptiness of the cavern. "You are not alone, Clint Mercer. You never have been." The words hit him like a wave. The barrier of fear, of isolation, shattered. He was not just a man of dust and death. He was a man capable of feeling, capable of love, capable of connection. And with that realization, the cavern began to shake, the walls trembling violently. Nzar roared, its many eyes glaring down at him, but Clint did not flinch. The fear that had once governed his every move was gone. He understood now but it no. Zahat. Clint closed his eyes and whispered softly to himself, "I'm not running anymore." When he opened his eyes again, the cavern was silent. The creature was gone. Outside, the storm had finally abated, and the land seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the deserted town of Dustgrave. The wind had died down, and for the first time in Clint's life, the air smelled sweet, unpolluted, untouched. The weight that had pressed against the earth for centuries had been lifted. Clint stood alone at the edge of the cavern, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. He could still feel the heat of the battle, the strain of confronting the darkest parts of himself. But the world was different now. It was quieter, gentler, as if a great cosmic injustice had been corrected. Lyrixa appeared behind him, her presence as ethereal as ever. But something in her expression had changed. It was no longer filled with the urgency of a mission. Now, it was filled with a quiet peace. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with awe. Clint didn't respond immediately. He stood there, taking in the vastness of the world before him. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about where he was going next. He wasn't thinking about running. He was simply present, and for Clint Mercer, that was enough. "I guess I did," he finally said, his voice rough with the weight of everything that had just transpired. "But I didn't do it alone." Lyrixa smiled faintly. "No, you never were." Clint took a deep breath, letting the cool desert air fill his lungs. The town of Dustgrave lay before him, but it no longer felt like a place of decay, of stagnation. It felt like a beginning. A place where the future could be rewritten. He could feel the pull of the road, but it wasn't the same pull anymore. It wasn't a need to escape. It was a choice, one that he would make when he was ready. And for the first time, he was ready to make that choice. Lyrixa stepped back, her form starting to fade like a dream. "I must go now," she said quietly. "But you'll be fine, Clint Mercer. You found your way home." Clint nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was nodding at her or at the world around him. The skies above, once dark with the threat of destruction, were clear now, filled with possibility. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice steady. Lyrixa smiled one last time, and then she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. Clint stood alone, but for the first time, he didn't feel lonely. He didn't feel like a ghost. He felt alive, and that was enough. The dust of the desert had settled. And so had Clint Mercer.